Hi guys, welcome, and if you're new here, my name is Elaine, and on this channel we talk about bags, mostly mid-range to vintage luxury. And today I'm going to be talking about Entrupy, which is an AI-powered authentication service, as well as the state of, well, Entrupy calls it state of the fake, but basically what's going on in the authentication world. I went down this rabbit hole because I did my video on tips for buying secondhand bags. That is part of my series for newbie bag buyers. One of my pieces of advice is to buy secondhand because one, the value, and two, I mean, there's just a lot of good gems out there, you know, but there's a lot of people who are afraid to get into it because of the fakes and how good they are. And I totally get it because it's, you know, was a fear of mine, and then it happened to me, and then you just kind of deal with it. And knock on wood, I luckily have not had to deal with it too often. I am pretty picky about who I buy from. So anyways, but I went down this rabbit hole about entropy and authentication and sort of the art of authentication. And so I just wanted to go over it real quick with you today. But to start off, Entrupy is an AI-powered authentication service. So it is sort of almost direct to consumer, but also does B2B, so business to business. But it is sort of just a software where you take pictures and then it is compared against a plethora of either fake or authentic items. And then I guess they do some sort of like, you know, statistical analysis and like come to a conclusion of whether or not the item is genuine or not. It's not foolproof, you know. I think the fakes are so good these days for some of these brands that no picture is going to be able to do the full authentication. It's really a matter of feel, because like where they skimp, where the fraudsters, the scammers skimp, is usually the quality of the leather as well as the hardware, and some of that cannot be determined through just photographs alone. It's like a tactile thing, which is why I think a lot of these other resellers might not use Entrupy. So here's sort of a breakdown. So those who do use Entrupy, this is from what I gather on the internet, is eBay. So eBay, their authentication service uses Entrupy. Goodwill also has a contract with Entrupy. I've seen Tanner Leatherstein use Entrupy, and then it says TJ Maxx and Nordstrom's also uses Entrupy for returns. I also did see on Reddit that Entrupy kind of just started from a service where they compared items to known fakes to then determine whether or not an item was real or not. I don't know if that's true. That's just rumor. Pretty much everything else they don't use Entrupy. So what I mean is the Real Fashion File, they do not use Entrupy. They use their own methods. Of the two, I think Fashion File is a little bit more thorough. And then there's Legit Grails and Real Authentication. Again, they also do not use Entrupy. They also have their own services. I do see, though, that AI is getting better every day. And as more and more items are uploaded, you know, AI will get better. I think Entrupy, at least for the most part, can get rid of low-hanging fruit. So that would be like the cheapest of the fakes. But I do think they probably need a little bit more expert hands-on experience when it comes to the really good fakes, the super fakes. Yeah, I mean, when you read Reddit, there's always someone who's had authentication issues with, you know, Entrupy, with the Real, with Fashion File, you know, Legit Grails, Real Authentication. Like sometimes there can be a conflicting conclusions between different authentication sources. So, I mean, this one story really got to me was this poor lady. She had 2 Loewe puzzles that she bought from, I think, Vinted. When she tried to resell it, they both turned out fake, but then when she authenticated it with one source, it was real, and then she authenticated with another source, it was fake, and then when she tried to sell it to Vestiaire Collective, it was fake. She tried to sell it back to Vinted, and then by this point, I guess Vinted had started using Entrupy or something, an authentication service, and so they said it was fake. And so, I mean, honestly, that is basically the worst case scenario when it comes to buying secondhand. Not to scare anyone off, but, you know, it does happen. So you do have to choose your sources wisely. I mean, I don't think it hurts to have multiple authentication services. So whether you use legit Grails or real authentication, or you sign up for Entrupy. But if you sign up for Entrupy, it's actually very expensive. Like the individual rate for it is quite high. I think hopefully, if they start getting a bigger database and bigger customer base, the prices could come down in a little bit, but we'll see. Anyways, as I was digging through this and looking up all this information, I did find Entrupy has their annual report called the State of the Fake. So basically telling you sort of their statistics when it comes to all the things they've authenticated in 2025. So I'm going to throw it up here and I'm going to try a new format for me, which is the pop my face down and below. We'll see how it goes. All right, so this is Entrupy State of the Fake for 2025. And if you look up here, they do have 24, 23. I think it goes all the way down to 2020. All right, well, anyways, letter from their CEO, looks like an SF Tech Bro. And then Entrupy's in New York, AI with, they do AI authentication solutions. Blah, blah. So here's their little, how does it work? Oh, it actually is a video. Cool. Wow. I guess I can see why it's so expensive. Like that's a whole thing attached to the back of their phone. Okay, interesting. Is that some sort of like zoom camera? Yeah, I guess that's a zoom thing. And that's how you, interesting. All right. So I guess, when I talked about my secondhand strategy tips, one of the things was to take a lot of close-ups and then you can always compare it. Basically, they're doing the same thing, but with AI to compare it with. Cool. That's authentic. Alrighty. That's how that works. And these are some of the smaller resellers that use Entrupy. I've never heard of anyone except Fashionica. Yeah, I see her on Instagram all the time, which is cool and good for her. All right, and then basically when something from Entrupy is not authentic, they just call it unidentified, which just means fake. And so here's the interesting things. I don't know, they said they had like, $6 billion worth of products authenticated, and all of that, 91.6% are authentic, 8.4% is fake. I think a lot of that is because the people who are using Entrupy already can weed out the really bad fakes, like from smell, from touch. They'll know what's real leather, not real leather, so I think this number is probably overinflated. And then on this side here, you can see luxury brands with the most authentications. So just saying which brands were sent in for authentication the most: Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Chanel, Prada, and Dior, basically the main players. They do have a little feature of Coach here saying Coach is going up. It is a Gen Z favorite. And on this side here, so Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Chanel, Prada, Dior. What are the things that were being authenticated? On the go totes: Gucci's Gigi Marmont, Chanel Classic Flap, of course, Prada re-editions, and of course Dior's Lady Dior. Top 5 most faked brands. All right, so this is in terms of highest overall volume of fakes. Most faked brands, we have Louis Vuitton, Prada, Gucci, Chanel, and YSL. So the only difference here is Dior. Dior dropped off here, and then now we have YSL as the most faked. And then top 5 most faked materials. I thought this was pretty interesting. So Prada nylon, Louis Vuitton other, which is probably like leather, Louis Vuitton monogram canvas, Gucci and Chanel calfskin, lambskin. So here's the breakdown. Prada nylon, I'm sure it's very easy to make fake a nylon bag. You know, nylon's already a fairly cheap material. And then right here, 18.4%, Goyard has maintained its spot as one of the most faked brands by volume. Dior, Hermes, and Celine dropped this year's top 5 based on fake unidentified rates relative to brand submission volume. So Goyard, yes, Goyard canvas, highly faked. I think especially the St. Louis tote is probably easy to fake because all you have is the canvas on the outside. There's just a lining on the inside, but there's no leather really except for the straps. The strap leather could be easily faked with a lower quality grade leather, so makes sense. Right, so top 5 brands with elevated risk of fakes. So these are probably the things I would not buy online secondhand for good reason, because these are highly faked items. So we have Goyard at 18.4%, St. Louis tote, like I said, that's going to be the most faked item. I think once you pair a Goyard with leather, whether it's an Anjou tote, or like I have my like the Goyard's version of Alma, like that thing there also has leather, so it's less likely to be faked. And if it is, you can tell it apart more easily. Second, Prada nylon, again, very risky. I will occasionally take that risk if it's like $300 or so, but not often. I did get a fake Prada nylon bag once. I thought it was fake. I gave it to my mom. And then number 3 here is Givenchy's Antigona satchels, which I'm kind of surprised that they're still a thing. I mean, Givenchy is really not that popular these days. Loewe puzzle, yes. So I mean, I do take my chances with the Loewe puzzle. I do only buy from reputable sources, but yes, it is a risk, just like my little story from Reddit, the poor lady who had 2 fake puzzle bags. And then last but not least is Saint Laurent with the Lulu chain shoulder bag. All right, so they had fakes around the globe. Interesting, just sort of like terms of volume. So the Americas, the North and South America, accounts for 40% of all Entrupy submissions, Asia Pacific 42%, and Europe's 11%. I mean, part of it is like, where's your customer base? If you're based in New York, obviously the Americas are going to have, you know, you're going to have more customers. In the United States, it's not much to that one. All right, the Americas. What are the top 3 most faked items, or yeah, I guess most faked and purchased in the US, which then gets submitted to Entrupy, is Louis Vuitton, 8.7%, Gucci's at 8.3%, and Chanel's at 6.3%. Yeah, most faked brand in the US is Louis Vuitton, in Canada, and in Mexico. All right, Asia Pacific, Prada. Prada is the most faked, that Prada nylon, yeah, in Japan. So I would be very careful about buying nylon products from Prada in Japan. Just word of warning. So you have Prada by a fairly high margin here, 16.4%, followed by Gucci and then Louis Vuitton. Back on this side, Taiwan and Indonesia, they have Louis Vuitton as their most faked. Makes sense. Europe and Middle East, top 3 fakes. Interesting. Saint Laurent at 12.5%. Chanel at 9%, and Louis Vuitton at 5.9%. So, Saint Laurent, really popular, I guess. Oh, in Italy, it's the most faked, while Great Britain and Germany have LV again as the most faked. They also do sneakers. I'm just going to breeze by it because this is not a sneaker channel. But if you're interested, I mean, I just thought this was Netherlands. Most faked was New Balance. Is that really that high of a ticket that it needs to be faked? Of course, Adidas in Germany, that makes sense. Talk a little bit about the environment this year. Yeah. And then dupes, yeah, they weigh in on dupe culture. So dupes is the same as fakes. Kind of, depends. Just basically showing how, you know, they're saying dupes are an act of rebellion. Consumers are basically saying these prices don't work for me. This economy doesn't work for me, but I want what I want. Why should I deprive myself? Yeah, sounds about right for, you know, a lot of people. But I mean, I don't know. It's one thing to buy dupes for yourself and to keep it and then destroy it at the end, which I actually don't think a lot of people do. Another thing to buy it and then pass that fraud on to somebody else who then sadly, like the woman who got 2 fake Loewe's, you know, they are SOL. Yeah. All right, trending social media. Counterfeiters are selling directly to consumers. Yep, Instagram. Oh man, I get so many ads or so many DMs about, let's, you know, here you can buy fakes directly from China. I'm okay. Return fraud economy. So I thought, you know, definitely heard of that before. Basically, you buy something and then you return a fake to the store. And a lot of times, you know, sales associates aren't authenticators, so they're not going to know. But, you know, with Entrupy, I guess hopefully there is a system to kind of try to weed it out. But yes, it cost an estimated $103 billion and accounted for 15.14% of all returns. This is in 2024. That is a high volume. That is a very pervasive scam. So even if you buy something new in store, there's no guarantee. So, you know, buyer beware, right? Interesting. The fraud fallout, authentication fatigue is making it harder for platforms to catch increasingly sophisticated fakes during return cycles, eroding trust and driving up cost. Escalating loss prevention is pushing retailers to tighten return policies and invest in fraud tools, often at the expense of customer experience. Proof of purchase wars will bring stricter documentation and digital receipt systems as brands try to close forgery loopholes. Insurance backlash is coming as fraud rises. Platforms and retailers may be forced to absorb more financial risk. And counterfeit recirculation ensures that every successful swap puts fakes back into the system, making resale even harder to police. I think some people who do this scam probably think it's a victimless crime, but it's not true. Someone down the road is going to be holding that short end of the stick, whether it's a buyer or the retailer, and in the end, it just affects everybody. I guess, you know, if you don't want to get a fake, don't buy designer. You can always buy mid-range. It's sad. I mean, it's hard. It's definitely harder these days because even if you buy it in store and that could be a fake, like how are you going to ever know whether or not something you have is real? I think for some of us old timers, when it comes to bag collecting, luckily we do have, you know, 20 plus years of experience. So before the super fakes, we could tell a fake from a real thing. But now that we are in this era of super duper fakes, it is harder for, I'm sure, everyone. Some headlines when it came to counterfeits, slave labor and counterfeit production, live selling. So yeah, now people are, you know, selling person to person. Interesting that now Entrupy is authenticating for TikTok shop. Yeah, so I think that's it. And I did also want to go over in 2024, I found was interesting. I don't believe these numbers. 99% perfect accuracy. So you say. But as you can see, 5 billion worth of inventory authenticated in 2024. 2025 was 6. So, you know, it is an ever-growing field. I'm sure Entrupy, as it gets better, will get more customers and you will see that number rise. So, I mean, sort of the same information, but there was something in here that I did found interesting, so I did want to talk about it. Interesting. I've never heard of this, but AI-generated images. Tools like Midjourney and DALL-E enable counterfeiters to produce convincing fake product images, posing a growing threat to brands. While current free versions have limitations, advancements are expected to lead to widespread use of these images. So interesting, you know, AI, there's AI authentication and there's also AI being used for counterfeiting. It really is sort of like a race, but then it also is up to the brands to step up their game to make sure it's harder for the counterfeiters they really need to also have a stake in this. Otherwise, why would anyone buy it? Like even LV, like why, or Prada nylon, like why would people buy it if, you know, you're talking about 30% of the items are fake. Here, Shopee, I've heard of it, but I've never, of course, shopped there, has been flagged as a notorious market for counterfeiting. So do not buy from Shopee. In response, Shopee has stated it prohibits the sale of infringing goods and taking steps to enhance its monitoring. That's just basically lip service. All right, so significant portion of counterfeit goods entering the U.S. market originates from China. So a 12% increase in the number of Chinese sellers engaged in selling fakes. And that is a 26% increase in the total volume. Luxury brands with the most authentications, like of course Louis Vuitton. Most authenticated material was monogram canvas. Most authenticated style here is the Speedy. 2025 was on the go. So this is just authentications performed. It doesn't actually mean whether or not the items were fake. But you know, this is a weird graph. I don't know. But anyways. Okay, luxury brands with the highest identified rate. So this is where I want to go. Okay, so in 2025, it did increase to 22.8%. It was 21.4% 2024. But the most unidentified or most faked material is Goyardine canvas in the St. Louis tote. Do not buy a secondhand St. Louis tote. I think the moral of that story, again, nylon, re-edition 2000, most faked. In 2024, we have Celine on here, which was not on there for 2025. Most identified material, other, is probably like leather or fake leather or, you know, not as great leather. But it is the most unidentified style. That's interesting, which is a Triomphe Classic, which I think is that like flap style bag. So buyer beware on Celine Classic bags. Hermes, again, was not on 2025, but in 2024, the most unidentified material is Clemence, with the most unidentified style being the Birkin. And this is my point here. This is basically, I only came to 2012 report for this to say, don't get a Clemence Birkin ever. Like I know, I'm sure there's some out there, but if you see one out there, it is most likely faked. Because in general, Birkins are made in Togo. Clemence is almost a little too smushy. Like it's not going to hold its structure well enough. And it's also very heavy. So I don't think, I mean, I'm sure Hermes has done it a couple times, you know, never say never. But I think for the most part, scammers use Clemence because it's cheaper, it's accessible. And they try to pass it off as Togo. And then it goes to a reseller who identifies it correctly as Clemence. But a Clemence Birkin is not common. So I personally will never buy a Clemence Birkin, no matter how good it looks. And then last but not least, Loewe on here is leather, puzzle bag, of course. So, you know, I did buy a couple of secondhand puzzle bags. I do have an original that came from Matches. I mean, now that you think about it, that could have been a fake. Who knows? I could just be living in my own delusional world. But I think it's real. I mean, I've had other Loewe items that I've purchased from the store, and I do always do sort of a cross check on my own. But yeah, who knows? And I think that's about it. Everything else is sort of the same info. Yeah, to me, this part here was the most interesting. All right, so now how do I get out of recording? All right, and that's it. I hope you found this interesting or informative. Let me know if you have any questions, or, you know, I would love to hear your 2 cents about this whole authentication world. We'll see where it goes. But yes, it is not easy buying secondhand. We can only try our best. And even buying it from a store now is no guarantee. So good luck for everyone out there, including myself. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, if you could consider a like or subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Bye.